well, we've got a couple more acquisitions for the shop. I needed a couple more projects, so had a customer come through here, a week or so ago, and we were talking about some other stuff, and he said, I've got a little lathe that I think you should have. So he supposedly had a little South Bend lathe, which I actually interpreted to be a little 9-inch, Model A, Model B, something like that. So we got around and he had a chuck, or he said he had a chuck. Well, he drug it in for me, and it wasn't a chuck at all. It's a brand new 8-inch super spacer that I'll show you at some point in time. I'm not going to do anything with it. It was still in the crate and everything else. It had been opened up, but it's virtually brand new. So we've got to clean the cosmoline off of it, and it's sat long enough in the cosmoline that it's got a little bit of corrosion on it too. So we'll have to clean that up, but it's virtually new. But anyway, he brought that up. So yesterday I loaded my son up in my old pickup in anticipation of running down, and he's about a little more than an hour from me here. So we ran down, and I had anticipation of throwing a little South Bend on a stand, hopefully fairly complete and fairly original, into the back of the pickup and heading back home, and it didn't work out quite like I'd hoped it would. So anyway, I drug home a lathe that I'll show, and that was a primary reason for going down. And actually we're going to break this up into at least a couple of videos in this little introduction, and that's what this is, introduction, because this is going to be a couple of restorations at some point in time. I'm not in a big hurry to get started on either of these, but there are ones that will happen, and I'll kind of give you an overview of both of them here in the next couple of little videos, but I wanted to give you an introduction to each of them. So this was a kind of an afterthought. This ended up coming home with me, and what it is it's an old 14-inch drill press, and it was made by Champion Blower and Forge back in who knows when. I haven't researched it that much, but it's an old flat belt drill press, and it's got an ugly looking fabric belt on it. It'll at some point get changed. We'll put a new leather belt on it, but I really like this old flat belt equipment. At one point I had anticipation of having a part of a workshop or a little workshop just with line shafts and run off of flat belt equipment. So anyway, and there's a story with some of this flat belt equipment, because there was a lathe down there that I really would have liked to have had, but I literally don't have the space for it. But anyway, this old drill press, it's been converted over. It does have a little 110 motor that powers it right now, and here's the bottom of it, and we've got our flat belts down here. This has been changed over, and we've got a stamped sheet metal pulley on here, and it runs on this little stand. It was bolted to this stand in the back, and I don't know how well that's going to show up. Probably not very well, but for right now we'll just leave it the way it is. It's got a little 110 belt, or 110 quarter-horse motor that was run down to this stamp pulley, and that's what ran it. Got a foot pedal on it that would have operated, and it needs to be lubed up. I took and bolt this in the lathe. I've spent the morning going through and spraying them down with degreaser and just hosing them down. We had to chase off a little bit of rats or mice out of the lathe, and this came out of a old farm building, or it wasn't an old building, it was a newer building, but this is basically an old farm operation that was one of those that had hundreds of acres, and it's been passed through the generations, and now things are kind of getting broken up into parcels and sold off, and as the family members pass, why part of the old houses are being sold off and that type of thing. And this came out of one of those shops. Very nice shop, but or a very nice pole building, but it just had some old equipment in it, and there's a lot of that stuff that was around on the homestead basically for the last 100 years type of thing. So that's where part of this came about. So at some point in time we'll break this down and do hopefully a fairly nice complete restoration on it. We're going to leave the flat belts, we're going to leave it as much original as we can, and it's in relatively good shape. It's had a piece of steel welded onto the top of the table. I would imagine at some point it probably got drilled and all kinds of holes in it. And the elevation screw, while it does work, the bracket here does a hula dance, because we've got a great big couple of big wows in this in this screw. So those are all things to be addressed, but I found it kind of interesting. You know, it's hard for me to walk by a old piece of equipment that I can get a pretty good deal on that interests me some. Hopefully at some point in time we'll get started on this, because we know I don't have enough projects. But we'll get started on this and clean it up and see what we can do with it, find out a little bit of the history of where these were made and when they were made and all that good stuff that goes along with it. But Champion Blower and Forge, they were around in the early days. They primarily built forges and blowers for the forges. When you start researching them a little bit, why it's a fairly common name. And obviously they built some drill presses. So we'll see. You know, I mean, it's not going to be any kind of a precision piece of equipment, but it is quite a piece of nostalgia as far as I'm concerned. So we'll get her cleaned up as time goes on. For right now, I'm just going to kind of rat all this stuff out because we've got enough other projects going on. But hopefully it won't be too awful long that we'll get to these next two projects. So hopefully you found this a little bit interesting. And comments or suggestions, any information you've got for me on this, leave it in the comments section for me below. And as always, thanks for taking the time to watch.